What's up, everybody? Welcome back to your favorite New York Jets subscription podcast, Badlands. I'm your host, Joe Caporoso. Part 3 of our 3-part Joe Douglas was fired trilogy. Part 1, Will Parkinson. Part 2, Paul and Connor. Part 3, me and Dalbin Asario. Dalbin, we had to do this. We had to get our own takes in before the day ended. I could not let this day pass without having a reaction podcast to another massive Jets news drop. What are your initial thoughts? And then I will give my POV on everything that has happened today, because the news has not stopped, with another Athletic article from our good friend Zach just dropping on everything going on behind the scenes for the Jets.
I joked with you before I came on that it feels like a New Orleans funeral. like we're just stringing them all out. It's interesting, man. Joe Douglas is a bad general manager. He's bad at his job. Like one of the worst general managers to ever grace the halls, the fabled halls of Florham Park. And I think what gets lost is that draft class with Sauce and Brees and Garrett Wilson and Jermaine Johnson. And shout out to Connor, because Connor said this on Badlands last week, and I chuckled when he said it, but I was like, yes, that makes sense. You give us enough shots in the top 100, we would have gotten that draft class right. Like it was easy enough. The picks were easy enough that like the elevation that this fan base did for him based off of making the obvious picks just never really made much sense to me, right? So you have that. And I think when you look at Joe Douglas's tenure, it can be summed up in three things. And you know this, the winning teams have protection up front, a franchise quarterback, and a good quarterback, right? And a good coach, a good head coach. Joe Douglas failed to get the head coach right. He failed to get the quarterback right, and then had to go trade for a washed-up quarterback. He failed to get the left tackle right, and then had to pay a washed-up left tackle, right? A left tackle that, I mean, I think you and I loved the signing, thought it made sense, like thought it was going to work as a last chance Jets kind of thing. But there were so many concerns about that left tackle that they had to use another first-round pick on another left tackle, right? So I think you're talking about just 30. What was the record? No winning seasons in
64.
30, like 64. Guys don't get a shot to get 3 head coaches, because he had Gase and he has Bob. Guys don't get chances to get 3 head coaches. They don't get a chance to get 3 quarterbacks, and they don't get a chance to get 3 franchise left tackles. It just doesn't happen. So it couldn't happen to a nicer guy. Woody Johnson is probably one of the more patient owners that you'll ever see in the NFL. He gave this team so much runway, and I think even he said, like, all right, before I head off to over the pond, I got to clear this out and set it up for somebody to come in and clean this up. And I think, lastly, I feel very much like Arya Stark. Like, I've been sitting in my house, like, the traitor Robert Saleh, the usurper Joe Douglas, and the last guy is Aaron Rodgers. That's the last guy to go. And I think this probably solidifies that Rodgers is gone. They're going to figure out a way to kind of get him out of here, and it's going to be a clean break. And I think the Jets are going to be better for it long term. It's just absolutely blowing the whole thing up.
Yeah. I mean, the speed at which decisions have been made this year has been surprising, right? Woody Johnson doesn't have a history of firing people in season. Now he's done it twice in season. Joe Douglas, we've been talking about this for a few weeks, where the Jets have had this shell company energy, and it seems like he's been checked out and not really working. Once it was decided that he wasn't getting a contract extension, it feels like it was mutually understood that his time here was up. So this was really more of a formality. I know a lot of people, if you're casually following the Jets, this feels like a big news drop and a news bomb. And look, we were surprised that it happened today, but this was over, and this has been over for a few weeks, at least, if not a few months. And as the leagues continue to come out of Florham Park, I think we're going to get more details on that. I don't think it's surprising, if you've been following the Jets, to know that they care a lot what the media thinks. They care a lot what people on the internet think. I do wish they would listen to this podcast a little more. I feel like you've gotten some stuff right. Get the subscription. Give them the subscription out there. But Douglas, I understand if you're a casual and you're like, oh, this guy drafted Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson, and he's done an awesome job. And like, what are we doing here? And like, this is chaos and a catastrophe. It's like, I'm not arguing that the Jets are not a chaotic situation. Right. And stuff has been a true actual soap opera circus this year to the
Yeah.
extent that they usually get teased for that has been the case. But
Yeah.
Douglas statistically has been one of the worst GMs in modern NFL history.
Yes.
And I understand there's some nuance to the record. You can make a fair case he was better than Idzik and McCagnon, but like, who cares if he's better than Idzik and McCagnon? That's not the bar you're trying to clear. The Jets were patient with him. They gave him more than enough time. It is very clear they need to gut this entire thing. Ideally, bring in a proper head of football operations who can reorganize the entire organization. It's not just the roster. It is analytics, sports medicine. It is how many coaches are on the staff. It's how we do game management. It's how we church and state with the business. It's how we just totally start fresh. And I think everyone else has said this on their reaction pods, and it's a longstanding mantra of turn on the Jets and Badlands. No half measures. Do the full thing. And I agree with you that this is the nail in the coffin that Aaron Rodgers will not be back next year.
Yeah.
Doing this early and this preemptively is like, listen, you know, you've leaked out. You want stability. You want continuity. We are not having any of that. We will have a new head coach. We will have a new front office completely. And we are going to give that person carte blanche. They're going to start the search now. And the sooner that ownership can get this decision to be made by someone who is not them directly, the better. Because why not get a jump on it? Joe Douglas is doing the Nate Hackett right now. So just get him out of the building at this point. Have someone come in and say, why are all these dudes who have been here for 15 to 17 years and we haven't made the playoffs once, like making any decisions? Gut the whole thing. Start over. This thing failed. It probably failed the second Rodgers got hurt against Buffalo. Go clean break with it. So look, we spent a lot of time over the last few years being, I would argue, like mildly critical of Douglas and getting hell for it. And I understand it's a scary thing to criticize the top football guy in the organization because if that's broken, that's a hard fix. It's easy to fire the coach. It's easy to bench the quarterback. It's easy to bench Tony Adams, like apparently Woody Johnson. Why don't you bench Michael Clemens while you're out there benching people if you're making decisions? What are we talking about here? That was the first thing I thought. But when the top football guy is bad, that's a scary thing. And Joe Douglas has been bad. I know there's been flashy positive things, but look at those draft classes. Who remembers the Rod Davis contract? Who remembers the Javon Kinlaw contract?
The Mike Williams contract from just 2-3 months ago.
I mean, we've seen this for a while, and it's. I'm happy. Look, I'm happy they ripped the Band-Aid off. I have no problem with them doing it now. I just think you got to keep going now. Go get the head of football operations. Make it very clear with Rodgers, like this is over. Like, hey, if you want to plead playing, like we'll work with you. Let's get you somewhere you're happy, but we don't need to have 1 foot in and 1 foot out on what is going to be as big of a reset as they've had in the front office. From a roster standpoint, there'll be some pieces that will add value. This isn't 2017 where you're starting Will Tye and Jermaine Kearse week 1. You'll be starting Garrett and Brees, and we'll see what happens around. You'll have Olu, you'll have Tippmann, but man, I mean, so I could tell from your Riverside screen who you want the Jets to hire. You won't see that if you're watching this on Patreon or YouTube. Where does your head go in terms of what the Jets should do next and how this search should go?
Pete Carroll tomorrow. Pete Carroll tomorrow. Like I think the benefit of ripping off the Band-Aid now is you can go get the guy now. You don't have to wait, till February to try and poach a head of football operations, because to your point, you're looking at a team that I think you have Garrett Wilson, who is a legitimate number 1 receiver in this league. And as you know, very similar to the NBA, right? Like if you don't have a number 1 receiver, you really can't do much. It's similar to a point guard, right? Like the Knicks got Jalen Brunson, suddenly they're a title contender. Like if you don't have a number 1 receiver, a guy that can command attention. And this is a guy who ultimately, if you're going to keep Devontae Adams, he's going to make Devontae Adams' life post 31 a lot easier because attention is going to be focused on Garrett Wilson. So you have Garrett Wilson. But Hassan Reddick is going to be gone. Tyron Smith, probably gone. CJ Mosley's another one that honestly probably gone, right? DJ Reed probably gone, right? Like these are guys you're going to see. It's time for the Jets core 4, which is Jermaine, Brees, Garrett, and Sauce. And there's been a lot of chatter, I think, about Sauce, after back-to-back all-pro seasons, you now have he becomes a Twitch influencer and maybe you take offers for him. I'm not against it, but ultimately Pete Carroll's the guy that I hire now because Pete Carroll knows when he took over Seattle, when he left USC and went to Seattle, the Seahawks had 250 transactions in the first year and a half. He overturned that entire roster. And when you looked at the Colts game, I bet you that if I would have called you, I said, Joe, how do you think this is going to end? You would have said they're going to run quarterback power to Michael Clemens' side with Anthony Richardson.
And they're going to walk into the end zone.
And they're going to walk into the end zone. If Pete Carroll's here, Michael Clemens is not. Michael Clemens is not. I think you need credibility, right? You need credibility because, and I saw this on the Discord when I popped in. Like they were like, "Well, who's going to take this job?" There's only 32 of these in the NFL. You will get a. You will get. They pay a lot of money. They pay a lot of money. And remember, when Woody hired Joe Douglas was supposed to be that guy, right? He was supposed to be this cycle's Ray Agnew. He was supposed to be that guy. And Woody gave him a blank check to revamp the scouting department and bring in his own guys and all that. 6 years. So there's no way that I think that you have to settle for like some like bean counter in Jacksonville or whatever. No, you go and get Pete Carroll. You go and get Pete Carroll now because then Pete Carroll can have a head start on getting who the next head coach is in here. Because the head coach here now in particular, and I know there's going to be a lot of chatter around, no more defensive guys. Don't get a defensive coordinator. The guy that I want is Aaron Glenn in Detroit because for him to continue to turn out a top 2 defense with no Aiden Hutchinson and no real pass rush is really impressive considering so you want to take somebody from a team that has built it from the ground up. Aaron Glenn has ties here. Pete Carroll has ties here. We get the coming home montages, but there's a guy that gives you credibility and it's Pete Carroll. And Pete Carroll gives your front office credibility in a way that even if you don't get Mike Vrabel as your head coach, even if you do go the first time head coach route, Pete Carroll gives you credibility to do that. If you go for like a neophyte GM, then you really got to hit a home run at the head coaching position. And it doesn't buy you as much latitude if you're really going to tear it down. But Pete Carroll's the guy, man. And you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait. You can hire him today. Woody can fly over on his way to London, pick Pete Carroll up, hire him, work it out, put him in charge. I think Pete Carroll's the guy. Connor had another dude. John Dorsey's the other guy. That if you could somehow convince him, you need adults in this room, man. You need adults in this room that are going to have the credibility, to your point, to tell Rodgers, all right, buddy, like, you want to go play for San Francisco so they don't play Brock Purdy? We can orchestrate that. We can get you over there, right? Like you want to go do that. And you're able to move on in a way that removes this circus kind of atmosphere. It's been a while since we've been a circus. Like it is a full-blown circus right now. But I think they'll come out better for it. Pete Carroll's the guy I would hire.
Listen, you wouldn't hear me complain about Pete Carroll. I know there's some concern around his age, but just getting a guy at his experience level who has experience with a winning organization would be exciting. I think you're going to hear Dorsey's name thrown around. I think we've thrown a few others around. You hear a lot of Agnew and Gonzi. And the GM personnel conversations are – I like to let them marinate a little more, right? Because you really like look at some of the candidates. You look at some of the – scouting departments and front offices of all these different teams. It's not as easy as sort of trying to pick out who the next head coach is going to be. And I'm curious to see how quickly this does or doesn't move and if they do actually hire sort of a new position they haven't had, which is sort of a de facto operations lead who's independent of the GM and personnel department. And yes, I'm sure Woody has a desire to weigh heavily on this decision before he goes wherever he's going to be an ambassador. So, you got a guy here at Douglas where it was just over, right? And why drag it out if he's not even like really working anymore? He's not involved in making the decisions. And look, I've been very critical of Douglas throughout the years because, and I was critical of McCagnon throughout the years because I didn't like how the standard was just be better than the previous terrible GM before you. And that's not a good enough standard, right? Douglas was never on Tannenbaum's level, and Tannenbaum had a lot of flaws. He was never even on Terry Bradway's level, and he had a lot of flaws too. You have to win games at the end of the day. You have to build a team that wins games. I think Connor said this well before, where acquiring talent and building a team are two different things, and Douglas could not build a team. And he had a lot of misses that, in retrospect, when we really dive into it in the offseason, and a lot of things behind the scenes that he just missed on. And they compile, and they compile, and they compile. And a lot of people, ourselves included, saw what some of the problems could be on the roster this year. We saw it. We didn't think, Sauce would struggle like this. We didn't think Tyron would struggle like this. We thought Rodgers would be better. But some of the things, not addressing safety, thinking Clemens could take JFM's role, not having any urgency to fill Huff's spot, letting the Reddick situation drag. Like these all killed them. And they made the wrong call on kicker over the summer too. So we don't have to laundry list everything. But bigger picture, I do think Douglas Douglas's years will be remembered, I think, sort of blended together with Maccagnan's years. And maybe Itzik's years will stand out because of the planes and the billboard thing, and it was such a quick tenure. But this whole like 10-year thing of Maccagnan and Douglas, I think when we looking back on it 20 years from now, it's just going to bleed into like one sad era. And again, it was Maccagnan who had the only winning season to kick off in 2015. So it was time to move on.
Absolutely.
We have a lot more time to talk about the things Joe Douglas did wrong. I think as a Jet fan, like, we don't have to act like this season hasn't been draining. It really has, right?
Yeah.
They've had more emergency podcast firings this year as earlier, right? Like, it's been a lot of news, but not a lot of winning. And that's exhausting in a season where you wanted to be talking about the playoff hunt.
Yeah.
Not a head coach search, not a GM search, not all the other stuff. Now it's going to be the Rodgers saga and what comes next with that. It's good for content, but it's not good for the health.
No, at all, dude. Well, and I think what's crazy too is that you're looking at a season like this is probably one of the most unlikable Jets teams in recent memory. Like Rodgers throwing Ulbrich under the bus, right? He threw him under the bus after the game. Then he was like, they're saying like, I knew that we had to score 30 to beat the Colts. I didn't know the Colts were an offensive juggernaut that you needed to score 30, right? And you're seeing all the bad Rodgers things pop up. And to your point, you saw all the bad Bob stuff pop up until they fired him, and you've seen all the bad Douglas stuff pop up. So this was really a perfect storm of crap, right? Like just everything that could have gone wrong for this team. Think about it. This team, Aaron Rodgers is 0-5 in one possession games this season. 0-5, right? They lost to the Denver Broncos, who, to your point about why these rebuilds don't ever have the Denver Broncos are sitting in the 7th wildcard spot, starting a veteran/rookie quarterback. No names on defense other than Nick Bonito and Patrick Surtain. Those are the only names they got on defense. You can't name me. They only have Cortland Sutton. Because they traded Jerry Jeudy, so they only got Cortland Sutton. And because they very much have Sean Payton already established his culture, they play the way that Sean Payton wants them to play. So when I look at Denver and I look at us, everything that could go wrong has. And the Jets, had they gotten average quarterback play, you're probably sitting at 6-4 right now. You're probably sitting at 7-4, sorry, or 6-5, still kind of in the nick of it. But to your point, every move that Joe Douglas made in the offseason went wrong. The Mike Williams signing was bad. Not finding a starting safety, bad. Dragging the feet on the Reddick thing, bad. Everything went bad. And his "I serve at the pleasure of the owner" thing was not good.
Totally obviously checked out.
Yeah.
Never gave the media the time of the day, but really in this presser, that was the final confirmation. Like, this dude's not working anymore. He's already looking for his next job. So why even drag this on anymore? And look, Douglas got, as you said, he got 3 quarterbacks. He got 3 head coaches. It's patient. It was more than enough time. And he had it just didn't work. It was never going to work. And unfortunately, that sucks because it's rebuild 6.0 now.
Right. Well, and not only that, but Joe, he also got 2 different variations of this team. They built it through the draft. It didn't work. So then they spent in free agency. So it just didn't work. Yeah.
They tried it every way and it failed every way. And I think a lot of it will trace back to the original sin of how bad he botched his first draft.
Yeah.
And that's how long it takes to dig out of some of those bad decisions that you make. So my only final sign off as we close this trilogy, and a PSA reminder, we will have an episode in the feed tomorrow that Connor and I recorded Monday night. It's still relevant to everything that happened because we were talking to the assumption that Douglas was going to get fired at the end of the year anyway. Yep. So give that a listen. We do some roster deep dives into next year and talk about a couple other things independent of him. Is that just go all the way, Jets, right? Yeah. Don't mess around with Rodgers. Rip the Band-Aid off, move past it. Don't keep guys in the building in football who have been here for all losing seasons. Truly start fresh. Truly let someone try in a different approach. There is some talent here where this does not have to be a 4-13 team next year. There are pieces here managed correctly and put together correctly with a few other things that can be competitive, particularly if you figure out something okay enough at the quarterback position. The timing was always weird with the Jets. It's never right, but the decisions ultimately have been right? There was no world with how this year was going that Saleh, Ulbrich, Rodgers, Douglas, any of these guys can
Yeah.
really be back. Brant Boyer and his terrible special teams.
Downing, Hackett, all of them.
Keith Carter,
Yeah.
it's over. We've tried it. It's been a long, long time. We don't have to fight about Joe Douglas anymore. We'll do the deep dive retrospective on the era, but that's it. And 30-64 is where it lands. Final sign off words.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think you have to blow it all up like the Joker in the Dark Knight with the hospital. Just press the button and like let it all crumble, because I think this is a team that last year everybody kept saying, oh, they're a quarterback away. But to your point, the window shut once Rodgers' Achilles went out. That was it, right? Because then what you were doing was you were chasing like this magical season where everything would go right. And that's just not the way to win. It's very similar to the Giants paying Daniel Jones $40 million after going to the playoffs, right? Like you're trying to replicate these conditions that just won't happen. The Jets have to blow it up. Hire Pete Carroll today. Let him hire Aaron Glenn right after the Lions win the Super Bowl, because it looks like that's where they're headed. Hire Aaron Glenn then. Bring in Mike McCarthy to be your offensive coordinator, man. He coach offense. But
Josh McCown is the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, roll the dice with Josh McCown, right? Because I think to your point, they have to do it differently. This is the opportunity to do it differently. Like the Knicks went and got Leon Rose. Everybody was like, you're going to put an agent in charge of your front office? Now look, title contenders. It can be done. It can be done.
We'll leave on an optimistic note. I did not think today on Badlands we would have our episode with Dan to kick it off, and then an absolute trilogy on Joe Douglas. But here we are. Thank you, everyone, for listening. As I said, new episode on the feed tomorrow, because why slow down with the content. And Zach will be on the feed later this week to talk about his article in The Athletic. So we got you covered in Badlands. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Dalbin, for jumping in here. Talk to you soon.